Hi everyone, Mrs. Kroom here. This tutorial is to help show you how to use and input data into your digital laboratory notebook. This right here is the title page. Each student will be given a copy of this laboratory notebook to use this year to keep all of your lab data in. As you scroll down, you'll notice that this area right here where it says science class name, you're going to want to type in the name of whatever class you are using this lab notebook for, the teacher's name, and then what period you have the course. Down here, you'll want to highlight this and then type in your name. And then on this line here, simply highlight and type in your email address. So these are the things that you need to do on the first page of this lab notebook when you download your copy. The next page is the table of contents, which is already pre-set up and hyperlinked to the different labs, which I'll show you in just a moment. So the table of contents, the preface is here. Any abbreviations that you're going to use would be here. Now notice that these are all blue, which means they're hyperlinked to another location in the documents. So if I click on preface here, it's going to open up a link. So I'm going to click on that, and it's going to take me directly to the preface. Okay. This is where you give a little bit of information about yourself. In this area here, you will want to fill in all of the courses that you have successfully completed at North Pocono High School. If we go back to the table of contents, you'll also notice that there's an abbreviations page. So we click on it, click the link, takes us right to abbreviations. These are some examples of abbreviations that you might use in your digital laboratory notebook. Add this. We want to add to this list as the year goes on. For chemistry, there are some terms in here that you can use as abbreviations, but if there's anything else that you're using as an abbreviation, you want to define it in this section of your lab. Okay, now here's where things get interesting. So I have the lab format outline as this first link here. When you click on this, it'll take you to everything that I want you to do in the lab. But before I get there, I want to skip ahead a little bit. So lab number 1 is whatever lab the first lab is that you're going to be doing. Notice that lab number 1 is hyperlinked as well as where it says name of lab here. If I change the name of this, it's going to get rid of the hyperlink, which is okay because you still have the hyperlink over here. So if you're in chemistry, your first lab is probably going to be Bunsen burner lab. And that time it actually kept the hyperlink, which is good. So we will put that in there, whatever the date is. Let's say I'm going to do it on that first Tuesday. We're in school, so I'm going to put 9/2/2020. And then to take you to where you're going to input your data, You can click on Lab 1 or you can click on the hyperlinked title. So now this takes me to the page 9. So here's where I'll type in the name of the lab. Bunsen burner. And then I would proceed to fill out all of this information if it's what your teacher is having you do. The nice part about this is that as you put your information into these different sections, there's a page break automatically inserted for each lab, which is hyperlinked back to your table of contents. So as you add information, if it goes onto a second page, this header will automatically move down to the next page, leaving you room for your other information, also keeping everything hyperlinked. So when Lab 2 is ready, you'll follow the same exact process you would highlight this. Let's say the next lab was going to be making observations. And then if I were to click on Lab 2, it's going to take me right to Lab 2. And I would want to type in that information. Now, I'd like to go back for a moment to this beginning part because we really didn't address this yet. The lab format outline. Depending on which course you are using this for, your teacher might have different information in here. The two items that you always want to make sure that you have are the name of the experiment and who your lab partner or lab partners are. Okay. This right here does not need to be included in the lab. Okay. I'm just going through and showing you how your lab report that you're making is actually following the scientific method. So in terms of items that need to be included in your lab report and in your lab notebook would be the underlined items. The bold-faced items are just there to show you that everything that you are putting into this notebook is the scientific method. So your purpose and your theory and research, depending on whether you're doing a formal lab or a notebooking informal lab, which we'll be doing both of them in here. It will depend on how in-depth your teacher wants you to do this. Creating a hypothesis, which is showing a relationship between independent and dependent variables. Some experiments don't have a hypothesis, and your teacher will help direct you as to how to fill out this section if that is the case. For example, you might be doing an activity or an experiment that proves the law of conservation of mass. You're not necessarily testing independent the change in the independent variable to see what effect it has on the dependent variable in that case. So you may not have to include that in that particular lab. Materials must be included. Procedure. Well, for materials and procedure, you can state, please refer to the lab handout, but if your teacher is having you do an inquiry lab where you are determining which materials you're going to use, that would be a time where you would have to make sure that you fill out your materials and procedure. Your data and graphs want to be in the same section. Your data should always be in a table format. And then depending on what kind of data you have will depend on what type of graph you are making for your data. I have it written here that if the graph has continuous data, then it should be a scatter plot. If the graph is discontinuous, then a bar graph or other graph that's recommended by your teacher should be used. So you want to make sure that you're looking at what you're actually graphing, what your data is. If it's continuous, you're looking for that scatter plot. If it's discontinuous, you're looking for that bar graph. Calculations. This is where you would include any calculations that you had to carry out for the lab, which would include density calculations, anything like that, if you were doing a density lab. Error analysis. You want to discuss error in this section. And this is where you calculate error. Percent error is where you would discuss this, okay? Interpreting the accuracy and precision of your experiment based on the error margins. This is where you would do standard deviation of and from the mean. And you will have a separate lesson on how to do that. 3 potential sources of error. I have a separate handout on this that I will provide to you. You need to tell me what you think the error is. You also need to discuss what specific category of error it is, and then how you could prevent that from happening in the future. And then that brings us to our last section, which is the conclusion and results section. So we are looking to see if the purpose was met, and you want to see if the data that you gathered from the lab supports the theory. This is where you have to make sure that you use actual data from your lab to support your answer. And if it doesn't support it, well, what is it showing? You have to be able to interpret the data. You also want to evaluate your hypothesis if you had one using CER method. And you could pose questions for future research in this particular area as well. The next part is questions. If there are any additional questions that your teacher would like you to answer, you would include them in the question section. And then the bibliography is a reference section where you are noting where you got your information from. Because remember, I can run an originality report on this. And if you copy pasted something from a website and didn't cite it, that's considered plagiarism. So you want to make sure that that does not happen. And then what will happen is that for every lab that you'll be turning in for me, you will just be submitting this. So you want to make sure that you have your digital lab notebook saved on your Google Drive in whatever class you have me for, whether it's AP Chemistry, Academic Chemistry, Accelerated Chemistry. And then for each assignment that I'm having you use this for, you would simply upload this so that I would be able to go in and check your work, and I will grade it electronically. So that is the basic tour of your digital lab notebook. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. But the reason why I'm doing this is to make everyone's life a little easier and to use less paper. Also, one other thing, you want to make sure that you update the page number that your experiment is starting on in this column as well. Okay? Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I will talk to everyone soon.